What's going on, guys? In this video we're getting into 5 books that really changed my life. I think number 2 is probably my personal favorite. Now before we get into that, my name's Keefe. I made this channel to help men create their ideal lives through self-mastery. Be sure to hit the bell icon and subscribe button so you don't miss tomorrow's video. Let's get straight into it. So when I was making this video and the title was 5 books that changed my life, I didn't want to be all cliche and write that, but then I looked at the books and realized these books actually did change my life in different ways. They're not all the same. In fact, they're not all self-help books either, but they did have profound impacts on the way I live my life. I'm going to link to all of them down in the description box below if you want to check any of them out. But without further ado, number 1 is a book I mentioned recently called Engineering the Alpha. It's actually the 2.0 version of it. This book is more than just a fitness book. It's about becoming a real man. The diet inside of the book, though, was huge for my understanding of diet, because before then I had no real understanding of how to eat. Like, I thought you just ate chicken breasts and that was what you're supposed to do. I hadn't really taken the time to research. This book provided me a very easy, straightforward way to eat healthy and to not only look good but feel good, because the book's about optimizing your hormones so your sex drive feels great, your testosterone goes up, you look good, you've got energy, you just feel great as a whole. And then the book also goes into more philosophical things about being a real man and being a strong man in our generation that we live in today. So I find it to be a very impactful and helpful book. And if you're somebody who's looking to get your health in check, I would definitely recommend checking out this book. Second book is technically 2 books. It's Power versus Force and Transcending the Levels of Consciousness. Now I put these 2 together because they're by the same author, Dr. David Hawkins, and you kind of need both of them together to get the full impact of the books. The reason for this is Power versus Force goes into more of a scientific approach and explains the understanding of what you're talking about here, whereas Transcending the Levels of Consciousness is kind of the guidebook or the how-to book of how to actually apply what you learned in Power versus Force. So what these 2 books are about understanding how you can raise your level of conscious awareness to create what you want in your life. For example, I've done a video on this actually. I'll probably redo it pretty soon because I want to do a better version of it, but I'll link to the one I've already done right here. But essentially, a recap of what we're talking about in that book is there are certain levels of consciousness. For example, at the bottom of the consciousness scale, there's shame, and shame is the worst emotion you can be feeling and the worst state you can be living in. And as a result, you bring things like that towards you, whereas you can reach up to level 200, which is where courage begins, and courage is where real power begins to happen rather than trying to force your way through life. And so and then also we can keep going up. Eventually you get to reason, which is where the intellect reigns supreme, where you've transcended your emotional drives and you are now a rational being, which most people think they would rank in that 400 level, but I believe it's only 12%, maybe even just 8% of the human population is actually above the 400 level, which is where reason begins. So most people have not transcended their emotional drives, and we actually rationalize our emotional drives rather than think of things clearly. And then beyond that, we get into things like love and peace and enlightenment eventually. But these books, I read them literally every single day. They've helped change my life, helped me understand things. They've put a lot of religious ideas together for me that I didn't quite understand. They've helped me understand why certain things make you happy and why other things don't. They helped me to transcend my need to pursue pleasure. Things like chasing meaningless sex. I really recently realized this. I was like, why am I spending time chasing after ass? I get it, and then it's unfulfilling right afterwards. There's no depth to it or meaning to it. David Hawkins is actually the one, I've quoted this before. He's the one who said that the ego values quantity, whereas the soul values quality. And this is something that I really take to heart now and understand that anything that you're chasing a quantity number in is an ego-based thing, and it'll never satisfy you, and it probably calibrates below 200. And part of reading this book is you're going to think a lot of these higher emotions, people tend to think that love is a weakness, but you'll find that it makes you a lot stronger. And these books tie in really well with a lot of law of attraction, things that you might have learned, but I felt felt like they gave a better perspective, because the law of attraction is about trying to force reality to bend to your will, whereas this book teaches you how to be one with reality, and reality will be kind to you as a result of that. Third book I've got down is called The Emotion Code. This book I've also made a video on as well. I'll probably redo this one too, but for now I'll link to it up here in the card section. But this book has been huge for me in getting rid of emotional baggage, okay? I'd gone to therapists before to deal with things like a lot of people do. I'd spent time working on things, but I've never found an easier way to just get rid of the baggage in your life than what it talks about in this book, which is where we use our understanding of quantum physics to understand that we are 99% empty space with particles vibrating at rapid rates, and our thoughts and emotions are the same. So essentially, if you look at your body under the correct type of camera, you can see this. They've made cameras that do this. And what this Emotion Code book teaches you how to do is release these emotions that will get trapped in your body that are holding you back. So if you continue to go through a reoccurring pattern, for example, perhaps you have, you're just very quick to get angry about something, perhaps. Well, that means you probably have a trapped emotion of anger, and it could have been there your whole life, or even from your parents could have passed it down to you genetically, but you can release it through this book. And I've noticed this has huge impacts on the way I feel. I used to, when I worked a part-time job, I was making like $9.50 an hour doing this job. I would always go to work and I'd have this like real anger and depressive feeling as I drove to work. And then I learned about this book and I released the feelings I had at the time, and I noticed that feeling went away. And I can do it in other areas. And it also, some of the tools it teaches you in this book work really well with the Power versus Force book I was talking about just before this, because it can show you, the tools in the book show you how to calibrate your level of consciousness, which they talk about in Power versus Force. And it also helps you release some of the baggage so you can raise your level of consciousness and just feel better in general. I really recommend this book if you're somebody who just wants to like let the past be the past, get rid of all the baggage in your life. It's super easy. You can get immediate results for the cost of a book rather than the cost of multiple therapy sessions. Fourth book is Jobs by Walter Isaacson, I believe it is. There's been multiple biographies of the man, but anyways, this is a biography of Steve Jobs, and I found this book to be so inspiring because it shows you the mind of a true genius, a creative genius who just understood a lot of things that most people just cannot grasp, and that's why Apple was such a creative company. I think it also does a really good job of like highlighting how parts of your life that you don't quite understand will come together to create who you are. And it talks a lot about understanding how Jobs had this idea. I think it was St. Francis of Assisi who said that you should wear life like a loose garment. And I think Steve Jobs embodied this. He wore life like a loose garment. He didn't take it that seriously, but simultaneously, he was committed to his passions and creating something great. But at the same time, like, he took a loss. He didn't take it that seriously. You know, he kind of went with the flow of life, and he followed his intuition more than his intellect. And that's how he came to create the iPhone, the iPod, all these different ideas. And you'll notice, like, Apple had revolutionary design. And the reason was because he took an intuitive approach to creating the product, whereas all the people in the tech world at the time were completely focused on analytics and numbers. They were very linear thinkers, whereas he was a very lateral thinker. So this is a great book to dive into the mind of somebody like that, to understand subjectivity versus objectivity, whereas again, most sciencey kind of people are very objectivity based. Steve Jobs was very subjectivity based. He understood the importance of experience and aesthetic, and that's why I think Apple is the most successful company in the world today, is because of that vision and that creative spirit that he had. And I've taken a lot of the stuff I learned in this book and applied it to the way I live my life. And also just to know, like, you don't have to be this like working 60-hour-a-week CEO who went to the like Harvard or the Ivy Leagues and did everything by the spreadsheet scientific model of how to do things, because Steve Jobs didn't do any of that. He dropped out of college. He went to India for a month and quit a job to do it. Like, again, he wore life like a loose garment. It's a very interesting story. I would definitely recommend that you check that out. I was honestly very moved by it in a lot of situations, just how fascinating it was how his life kind of like wove together, because he just was comfortable trusting life to work itself out for him. Fifth book, The 10X Rule by Grant Cardone. This one showed me a new understanding about money. Before this, I think I had the conception that the middle class was a decent thing to aim for, but he showed me in this book that the middle class was a bad idea. He also showed me that men in particular, but just people in general, need to take more responsibility for their finances. They need to stop leaving that up to somebody out of the way and ignoring it. We need to have financial accountability. We need to have plans. We need to understand cash flow rather than putting money in a savings account that's not going to grow, or even putting it in the stock market. We need something that pays us on a monthly basis, real hard cash that we can spend. He's the one who showed me the understanding of using passive income, leveraging passive income so that you could create financial freedom for yourself. And that financial freedom wasn't about how much money you made on the time that you were spending. It was how much money you made when you weren't working. How much money could you make while you were sleeping, basically. And so I used to buy into the whole massive action thing that he talks about in this book. I don't completely buy into that anymore. I think there is some value in it. Like when I was getting my real estate license, I took massive action. Anything about the book that I wasn't confident in, the textbook, I went back and I studied it. I'd spend like 8 hours a day studying these books, making sure I was ready to rock for that test so that I could pass it. And it ended up needing all of that effort to make sure that I got there. But I've also found that the massive action thing can be taken the wrong way, and that I find that personally more of a flow style of creation and work has been more effective for me. But even still, just that understanding of the perspective shift on money and how to use it has been essential to my life, and so I had to put that book on here as well. Guys, I want you to give me a like if you got something out of this video, and again, hit the subscribe button and bell icon if you're new to my channel. I put out new videos every single day, so you won't want to miss any of those. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.